This is episode 40 of the Relentless Man podcast. Shivani Kavuluru. Hi, and welcome to the Relentless Man podcast. We are your host, Christian Mojaiso, and our mission in life is to help men die empty, to make sure that you die having used up every ounce of potential that is trapped within you, so that when you're on your deathbed, you have no regrets because you gave life your all. In this episode, we're having a chat with Shivani Kavuluru. Shivani is a student at Pitzer College. She's an English major, and she's really interesting to talk to. She has a lot of interesting insights into politics, into the nature of dialogue, into society, how to make a good society. And yeah, we pursue an angle that we haven't really pursued before in this particular podcast. Because typically we don't really look at the political side of things, but Shivani turns out to be very interested in politics and likes to think about politics and leadership. And so we pursue things through the lens of leadership and politics. And the most fascinating thing is that, once again, the questions of life, the deep fundamental questions of life, the questions that one needs to answer in order to die empty, well, they show up too when you look at the world through a political lens. Right? They questions of significance, questions of recognizing others, questions of, well, how to treat people, questions of how do we deal with the fact that there are so many horrible things happening in the world, questions of what makes something good, what makes something bad, what is evil, how can we deal with these base human emotions, anger, greed, fear, frustration, anxiety, all these deep human emotions that screw us up so much. How do we deal with those? All those questions are tackled in this episode, and Shivani goes really deep into thinking about these questions and giving us her own perspective on politics, on life, on what to do with these fundamental questions. And at some point, she also goes really deep into thinking about dialogue, the nature of dialogue, and thinking about whether dialogue may be a solution to some of the hate and dislike we have for others. Could dialogue be a unifying thing? And what's the relationship between dialogue and active listening? Can there be dialogue without active listening? We think about why is active listening so important. So, ladies and gentlemen, we give you Shivani.
Okay, great. Hi Shivani, and welcome to the Relentless Man podcast. We're really glad. It's an honor having you here.
Aw, you're too sweet already. Oh my God. Thank you. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just when we started talking, you were talking about your desire to go to law school. When did you decide you wanted to be a lawyer?
Oh my God. I didn't necessarily decide. When I was in 6th grade, I lived in India. I went to an international school. And I participated in something called Toastmasters, which was basically this really fun impromptu speaking event. You'd pick up a little piece of paper and you'd be asked to talk on the fly for 60 seconds. And after doing a couple of those, one of my English professors at the time pulled me aside and asked me if I knew what a lawyer was. And at the time, I didn't really know much of what a lawyer actually does, let alone the benefits or the different varieties of law.
How old were you at this time?
In 6th grade.
Okay.
11, 12 maybe.
Interesting. Okay.
And she told me about it, and she told me that some of her friends were lawyers, and she kind of planted the seed then. But I didn't really know that that's what I wanted to do. I always wanted to become an interior designer, which is a little different from being a lawyer. And then when I moved back to America in 10th grade, I joined mock trial. And after my first night in being in the courtroom and cross-examining a witness, I knew that's what I wanted to do.
Wait a second. So in mock trial, do you what is mock trial? I have no idea what that is.
Mock trial is basically you're given a case. Usually they pull some true instances, but it's mostly made up. It's a made-up case. You go to an actual courtroom with an actual judge and actual lawyers and attorneys, or whatever you call them, and they all basically sit in a room and watch you and your team tackle this case. So there's a prosecution, there's a defense, and there's people who play characters. They go to the stand. It's very official. They say everything, they say, do you solemnly affirm to say the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? And it's very real.
Right.
And I got a lot of good connections and internship opportunities just by those lawyers watching me, like a high school student, do all those things and try to pretend like I know the law and objections and hearsay, and just learning it and having a coach, like an attorney coach who's actually a practicing attorney in the Bay Area, I think is what made me decide that I wanted to become a lawyer. I really liked the idea of being the voice when people's voices aren't being heard enough because the system just isn't working in their favor. And that was a really attractive thing to me. I wanted to see what I could do to help in that process. And that's when I knew I wanted to become a lawyer.
Okay.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'll still interior design my house. I'll tell my dad that this pillow does not go with the couch. But
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so it seems like it's really important to you to take people who don't have a voice and give them a voice. Is that, or speak for people?
Initially, that's how it started. It was a very altruistic, optimistic view of what the law is. And as I went through college, I started finding out more and more about how broken the system is. And it's not just lawyers that we need. It's ethical judges. It's not just ethical judges that we need. We need ethical people with integrity writing the law. So I would just be one facet in helping the problem is what I realized. But as a kid, it was always like, I will be the voice for the voiceless and this is what I'll do to help. And going through college, a lot of people thought that I'd be disillusioned because of how crappy sometimes the situation can be and where the power really lies.
Yes.
But if anything, I think I've become more determined because I think we need more people who have a certain sense of, this is morally wrong, this is incorrect. And when they see politicians or when they see judges who are lacking in integrity, I feel like since I believe I have the capacity to step up and do something about it, I still want to be a lawyer. I still want to do that. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, no, let's go back to that thread, though. That thread is pretty interesting. So, you come to college and you're realizing that the system is broken, right? In a sense, it's not functioning as you thought it would. Right?
No, not really.
So how does that make you feel?
Initially, it made me feel pretty helpless and powerless because I saw people using their status, their money, essentially, to get them out of the law. I've heard of so many instances where people with the means and the resources could basically evade the justice system. And I see that happening a lot. So at first I was really frustrated. And then I realized that there's equally passionate people around me who, at least I believe, have a good ethical, moral standard and have a really high sense of integrity. And they want to go into politics. And I just know that because of the people I already see here who I feel genuinely have a good heart and want to make the world a better place in whatever capacity they can, I think for the most part, we still have enough grassroots momentum to change some of how the system works.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm also, ridiculously optimistic. So I've talked about this with my friends, and they're, just rolling their eyes, and they're like, we're not going to disillusion you, and we're happy that you think this way, and we hope more people think this way, but
right.
I mean, there are situations that are so beyond unfair and not okay that end up happening in the world. But no, I still think it's worth it to try.
Right.
I haven't been like convinced otherwise yet.
Okay, so what optimism are you talking about? Are you talking about optimism in terms of what? Optimism that the world will, or that you can have an impact on the world and make it better? Is that what we're talking about?
I mean, optimism in the face of some of the realities of how broken the system is. Like, I've talked to people who tell me, like, the system is so beyond broken that even the little footsteps, like, in the right direction are going to take overall such a long time to make any huge tangible change that it's just exhausting for the people that try to. Or that's the counter argument I've heard to, like, my extreme enthusiasm and optimism. They said that, you know, there's a lot of people trying, there's a lot of good people doing good things, doing baby steps.
Right.
But the overwhelming majority and visibility of things, at least in the news these days, is just all the bad crap that's going on, all the bad crap that is continuing to go on regardless of all the good things that people are trying to do to push against it. And that's often my biggest contender in terms of, like, my worldviews, because that is something I have to contend in the end. Like, there are some things that end up working not in the favor of what I believe is just and what a lot of people believe is just. So, you know, bad judges, corrupt politicians, like, things happening under the table, like, those things really frustrate me.
Why do you think they frustrate you?
I guess they frustrate me because for the sole reason that I just don't, I know fair is a really easy word to misuse. I just don't understand why people would, for example, in terms of politicians, for example, votes mean a lot to me. Like, when I put a vote, it's not just like I'm putting something on the ballot. I'm trusting you to hold yourself to a certain ethical standard. I'm trusting you with this power because I can't see what you're doing every second of every day. So when I vote for you, I expect you to, even in the instances where I can't look over you, to act by a certain moral and ethical code that, for me at least, involves, like, you know, not misusing the rules to your advantage, not trying to look for loopholes, not trying to abuse the system in ways that only benefits you and not the people who voted for you. So it's instances like that that irritate me because, like, so many things happen under the table that people just don't know about, and people don't really have the time to look at every second of every day that what politicians are doing. I guess that's why we, like, try to make an informed vote.
Right.
Because we're saying, like, based off of the things you did, I hope that you stick to what you're putting out there.
Right.
So when people don't, it's inconsistent, and that bugs me.
Okay, so wait, is it the inconsistency that bugs you, or is it like maybe betrayal? Like, you trusted someone and then the politician betrayed you. Like, oh, you're going to live up to these standards, and they really don't. They just wanted your vote. Yeah,
I think it's definitely the betrayal that comes as a result of their inconsistency or their lack of truthfulness.
Right.
Or lack of transparency in, like, what their real motives are. Yeah, God, that really bugs me so much.
Well, I mean, it doesn't feel good when just to be lied to, right? It's just being lied to.
Like, even on a friend-to-friend level, like, that's just not something. That's not a pleasant experience, and I feel like if we can understand that from something as basic as, like, a friendship, I feel there's no excuse for the relationship between a voter and someone who they're voting for, like a candidate, to ignore that. It seems like a pretty basic level of trust and human decency there.
Right. Well, okay. Why do you think, like, what? Okay, we don't know, right? But presumably these, before people get into politics, right, we start out as really, really nice people. Most people, we hope.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
here's hoping.
Right. If we assume that most people are usually just nice and friendly, and they don't want to lie, right? They're trying to be moral. Then it would mean that when people get into politics, something happens to them. Do you think these politicians started out as liars, or they got into politics and then transformed there and just became completely untrustworthy?
I mean, I can't speak for every instance ever, but I do think that there are some people that at least I've seen, for example, in Indian politics, which gets me really upset all the time because of how corrupt it is. It's so beyond corrupt, I don't know if there's anything redeemable there.
Okay.
But, so for example, one thing I think that happens is comfort and complacency. And I think this is a phenomenon you can see on a small scale and a large scale. So once people get enough votes to win a certain title or position, there's a sense, or there's a trend that I've seen of not just complacency and comfort, but relief that they already got what they got, and comfort that it's going to be hard to knock them out of that. That gives them a sort of free rein and free will to do as they please, because they've already succeeded. They've already got what they wanted to get.
Okay, so they get a position, then that makes the politician comfortable,
yeah,
right? And then what happens next? The complacency part.
Well, I think the complacency is because of the fact that they don't fear much after they get their position. At least in India, for example, it's really hard to uproot a politician. I have seen politicians in cars being able to completely stay ahead of traffic, push cars away, and there's so many times that I've seen ambulances in India wait for traffic. Right, they just feel like they're very entitled, I think.
Okay. So what we're talking about here is, are we saying that, okay, we have some politician, he gets into power, and now he succeeded, right? And then it's very hard to get rid of him. And so now he has no incentive to necessarily be honest, because even if he's not, there's no real consequence. So at least it's hard to really punish him for it.
Yeah. There's a harder practice of checks and balances in some situations where checking the people in power doesn't happen as frequently, primarily because the people in power are often also the people who get to change the rules. So if there was a system of checks and balances that worked before, it could very well also mean that the person in power can get rid of that, which is a problem because then you can't check power.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, it seems that the United States is based on the idea of checks and balances, right? So it's like, we can't give the president too much power because that's why we need like the Senate. Maybe the Senate is going to stop him, or the justice system is, right? What's it called? The judiciary? It's a justice system, yeah. Right. So, I mean, it feels like a bit like distrust, isn't it? That like the fact that we need checks and balances doesn't that mean that we like don't trust each other that much? Because if you trusted the president, then why would you need to check him?
Free rein.
Yeah.
No, I think for me personally, a system of checks and balances arises from the acknowledgement of, as humans, too much power can be seductive to the human condition. And I think that's why we split it up. It's because we recognize and we've seen in the past that when power is concentrated, people can sort of get drunk on power.
Right.
And that's why we separated it. I think that, I mean, I didn't do so well in my history classes as a child, but from what I understood, like I think that it's that understanding of, in the past, we've seen people misuse their power because no one was there to check it.
Right.
So by separating it, everyone has a little bit of power where they're not overreaching on other groups while also keeping each other accountable.
Right. Okay, so we're saying that this is not really distrust. It's more of a historical thing. We've seen what happens when people are given too much power and it goes unchecked.
Yeah.
Okay. So is it then fear? Are we just afraid of the past repeating itself? Is that why we most of the successful systems seems to be the ones that have checks and balances?
It's interesting that you said the past repeating itself, because I just had a conversation about history being cyclical in a very weird and eerie way.
Okay.
And my AP US history teacher also said that history happens in cycles. And I was talking with this one friend about, it wasn't even a friend. You know what this was? This was the Pitzer alumni, little event, and Pitzer alum came and showed up, and we got to have lunch and talk with them. And I was speaking with this one person, and they were saying that right now they're at a place, again, or to them at least, it felt like a repeat of the 60s and an uprising of fascism and divisiveness and hate, and you see people uniting for things like unity, respect, and love and dignity, and you see this weird, eerie reflection of a period of extreme racism, bigotry, and inequality. And that's always existed, but with people in power who don't necessarily have certain moral standards that they live by, or have any code of ethics, or in the case of America currently, any basic human decency. There's a problem with people who end up having that much power and say in... Because my mom always said, monkey see, monkey do. It just sets a wrong precedent for everybody in this country to have someone in that much power being so careless and disrespectful.
Right. So you're worried that people will copy that and end up doing the same kind of stuff.
Are. I think there's people that I've seen and heard who genuinely believe all the stuff that he says, regardless of the fact that sometimes it's not even true. But they'll believe it because of the fact that he's in a specific position of power, or rather...
Well, he's the leader.
Yeah, he's
right.
One of the most, he's in one of the most powerful positions in the world. And it's terrifying.
Yeah,
One day where I don't go saying his name is a good day.
Right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to tap the table.
It's fine. It's pure emotion, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that theme is really important. It seems very common, we're talking about just being president or being a politician. But there's always, it seems pretty common where we get into any position of power, perceived power, and somehow something happens. Have you ever found yourself in any position of power and noticed the effects of, how to say it? So whether this is true or not, who knows, right? Mm-hmm. So apparently there's these psychological studies, we're not going to put much credence, but apparently there's this idea that when you give people power, or even give them the semblance of power, sometimes they tend to, the levels of empathy go down. I don't know if you've ever heard this before.
I've heard it and I've seen it, and it's the worst thing.
Have you ever, have you ever experienced it though? Okay, maybe have you ever been in a position where you have authority over others? And let's start from there. Yeah.
No, because empathy is the one thing that is so integral to how I see leadership and friendship and any relationship. And what's weird is a big critique that I've gotten of at least my personal leadership is that it's so nice that it's fake. And that upsets me.
That's what
so
someone
much.
told you?
That's what people told me.
You're too nice to be a leader.
They said, you're like a Bernie. You won't make it because you don't compromise every now and then on niceties and kindness and ethics. And honestly, it seems a little fake. And the reason why I'm so upset by that is because when did we end up in a place or a mindset where we associate crassness and being curt or a lack of empathy as something that is more real and genuine than just being kind and nice and empathetic and compassionate to people?
Right.
And I don't think this is a specific trend here. I've seen it and heard it so many times, even back home, where people say, oh, that was such a rude comment. You were so honest. I think honesty without tact is cruelty. Like, there are situations where you have to say things for what they are, but at least the way I see it, it is not that hard to be considerate about other people and where they're coming from before you say something. And
right.
Yeah. And like the way I think, so for example, I don't know if I'm supposed to name drop people, but there's one person whose leadership I aspire to mimic and also whose leadership I agree with. And his birthday was actually yesterday. His name is Shoyok Chakraborty. He's a student. He was from Pomona. He's a junior. Really fun Indian dude. He's such a good time. He started something called Damage Control Action Network.
Never heard of it.
And it's a 5C organization that started the day after Donald Trump got elected president.
Ah.
And it initially was exactly what it sounded. It was Damage Control Action Network. You know, we rallied for the sanctuary city. We spoke in City Hall. We've done a lot of Know Your Rights events. And we later changed our name to College Community Action Network. But he has been able to mobilize so many people. And I think why people like him is he can go into the room knowing that he's a founder of this enormous group with such humility and honor that he doesn't take himself too seriously.
Okay.
And he takes everybody else in the room so seriously and values them. And that's what I really like. I like people who, definitely take their job seriously, but not themselves too seriously, Like, he can come into a room, make fun of himself. He's, sitting where everyone else is sitting. And there's a real sense of equality in leadership there. And I really, really like that. And I think leaders like that, and you see this with, I saw this with Obama, you see this with Justin Trudeau. They are not full of themselves. They understand, at the end of the day, they're a person, they make mistakes, they're human, and they will only achieve their likability by being with others in an equal sense.
Right. So here we're talking about equality, mm-hmm. right? And in particular, as a leader, being the sort of person that views yourself as equal to everybody, not superior because you're in a leadership position.
Exactly.
Right. So in experience, it seems that we've experienced sometimes that there seems to be a difference between wanting to believe something mm-hmm. and actually believing something.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah.
So, if we pick people randomly on the street, they'll tell us, oh yeah, we want to believe that everybody's equal, mm-hmm. right? But then to truly believe and act in accordance with that point of view is really hard. How does one do that?
I think body language is very important.
Okay.
And I think leading with compassion and empathy and trying to make sure that everyone not only feels heard, but is actually heard. Everyone feels like they're valid and they belong there and that they're there for a reason, I think are some important tactics to use. And just make sure that you're always being conscientious that you're doing those things. But also, I think one thing that's very important to me is recognition.
Okay.
For me personally, people always ask, oh, what's your motive? Why are you doing this? Why are you really doing this?
Yes.
Are you going to put this on your resume, Shivani? And I'm like, you know what? No. Because for me, I get happiness when someone comes up to me in the dining hall and says, thanks for helping me. I wouldn't have been able to do that without you. And it's that moment of recognition that makes me so happy and reminds me why I do what I do. Why I spend so much time on Student Senate. It's so... Every now and then, someone will give me a shout out and say, Shivani, thank you so much for doing this. This really helped me. Mm. Or, oh, thank you for giving me the link. I was able to get money and I went to the conference. Thank you so much. And I think that feeling of recognition is important and we don't do it. We don't do it nearly enough. Sometimes we don't do it at all. Mm. And I think a good leader and an empathetic leader will take the time to recognize the small victories and the hard work of the people around them. For example, some things that I've seen really work in other leadership groups that I've been a part of is they really can, and I like to call this get to know the person behind the position. like get to know the person behind the position.
Okay.
They have the person's picture, and they have very honest questions like these, actually. And they say, what was one time where you felt like you failed? I mean, maybe fail is a strong word, or where you didn't do so well, like while in this organization, or what's something you could have done differently? What's something you're proud of? Like an accomplishment that you've made in this organization. Why are you in this organization? So when other people who aren't read that, I think they understand the candor of such a response. They see a face to it. They see, oh my God, I remember what that student was talking about. I'm so glad they're honest and open about it. And oh, I do remember that accomplishment. Actually, that accomplishment helped me get something that I needed. And now there's recognition. And now, there's a face to the hard work. And now any student can go see that and thank someone. And they otherwise wouldn't have known. Like sometimes it's such a thankless job. And I feel like every person in a leadership organization or group does do some amount of work that ends up benefiting someone in one way or another by virtue of it being an organization that aims to, help people around it. And I feel like when we forget little things like failing to recognize, thank, and acknowledge people that are a part of it, you lose group morale. Like a lot of people think group morale is, just having different banners or different titles and saying like, you are the group morale coordinator. Like you don't need a group morale coordinator. You need to do and act in a way that increases group morale. And a lot of that is recognizing, thanking people for their labor, their time, and oftentimes like even their emotional fortitude for pulling time out of their lives, out of their academic lives to focus it on helping other people. Like I feel like that isn't recognized or thanked nearly enough. And I see tons of my friends going above and beyond without a single thank you.
Right.
So I feel like a leader should do that.
Should
or create a culture where people understand that, we should all be thankful. It's kind of like a pay it forward thing. Someone sees someone else being thankful, they end up being thankful, and then the other person ends up being thankful. And then we create this butterfly effect.
Right. Okay, so there's like two directions we can go in this. One way is we could go into recognition. Yeah, let's go into recognition. Okay. So one thing we're saying here is that, well, if we want to be like really good at leadership, one of the things we need to do is to recognize every member of whatever group it is that we're leading, right? Because even if it's hard to see, every one of them is contributing something to the organization or community.
Yeah.
Right. And so part of what we're saying here is that if we don't recognize people, something's not right there. Right? If we're not recognizing people, something's wrong, at least with our leadership, or at least, or let's put it this way. It's a direct question. Why is recognition so important to us as people? Because it goes both ways, right? Being recognized as a leader, recognizing the people you're leading.
Yeah.
Why do we need recognition?
Well, personally, recognition and thankfulness to me are really important because that is how I understand that I've made one person's life a tiny bit better. And I think that reminds me at times when I'm really stressed out and wondering, why I put so many hours in. It reminds me that, hey, you remember that one person who said you made their life a little bit easier? That's why you're doing this. It's so you can help people in a way that's tangible to them and that they recognize. So I think when you're in any position, being recognized is just a positive thing. Like if you're recognized or thanked, like I'm not sure how deep I can get into the brain and like I don't know, like compliments, I think. Definitely, like genuine compliments make people happy.
Well, yeah, I mean, so clearly going into the brain, none of us is a neuroscientist. Okay,
no.
That makes sense, right? So maybe it may not be wise for us to take the root of like the nature of the brain.
Yeah.
But it still begs the question. why do we need people to compliment us, right? When we don't need to think about it as in terms of brain science, but why is that so important to us? For instance, why do we feel so bad when people don't compliment us or don't recognize us?
So I've heard a lot of arguments that say, sometimes if you really care about what you do, you don't need thanking. You don't need recognition because the satisfaction from doing the job itself should be enough. But oftentimes I've seen that when you try to run a group without thanking people who are doing things for you or doing things for the community, even though they could be the nicest person in the world and they don't really need recognition and they don't necessarily ask for it, I think it's something that we just should do. And this might be by virtue of the kind of leader I am. I took a DISC survey, and it's like DISC. And I fall under the category of a leader that likes to be very inclusive and open and transparent and wants to make sure that everyone is feeling okay and loved and heard. And there's different types of leaders. There's D is like a dominant leader who's very commanding and, kind of in your face. This is what we're going to do. This is when we're going to do it. This is how we're going to do it.
Right.
And there's other leaders who are like C, who are like, no, like slow down. Let's think about how we can effectively do this, baby steps. And, they usually like to be like the brains of the operation. And a lot of the things that I ended up saying and that I realize I'm talking about weirdly align with the kind of leader that this test said I am. And it's the kind that recognizes that, of course, like we should just do things because we like doing them without having to expect recognition. And while it's fine to not expect recognition, I think people still deserve recognition.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so we're differentiating between expecting recognition and deserving a recognition. Right, so it makes sense giving recognition to others, right? Mm-hmm. It's more of like if at the moment we could think of an individual level, right? So, okay, fine. What about just ourselves, Mm-hmm. It's a hard question. It's genuinely a hard problem. Why is it that, okay, we may give recognition to others. Why is it that we ourselves need it so much? Like, if people don't recognize us, if people don't compliment us, why does that bug us so much? Or perhaps we could just look at a parallel question and ask this instead. If you could pick between being the sort of person that does their job whether or not people recognizes them, mm-hmm. right, and the sort of person that needs to be recognized, which one would you pick?
I would pick doing a job regardless if people recognize me because the job matters more.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah, no, the job does matter more. I just think that we should try to move forward to create a culture where everyone feels like they're valued, like their time and their effort is valued. Because I think that when we do that, when we create that kind of culture, people will automatically, without even realizing it, subconsciously just give more, do more, work harder. And I definitely agree, like there are people, and definitely myself too, that will continue to do that without having anyone, push them or thank them. But if we want to increase the number of those kind of people existing, I think the trick to do that is to genuinely thank them for their work. And when we do that, people will be more incentivized. People will be more energized. There will be high group morale. They will want to do things more.
Okay. Right. So what we're saying is when it comes to leading people, we want to recognize them, because if we recognize them, well, they're going to want to do more, right? They're going to want to contribute more to the organization. They'll do more than they would if they were not recognized at all.
Yeah,
right?
Because I think that they'll feel like they're valued, like they're existence in that group
Right.
is valuable and important. And I think oftentimes people do question their self-worth and whether or not they're actually making a contribution. And I think if a person is capable of letting that be known, then they don't necessarily have this 100% obligation to do it. I'm just saying it would be nice, because I know for a fact it would definitely boost the confidence of a lot of people who end up putting a lot of their time and labor into groups that help other people.
Right. Okay. So let's keep looking at it from the point of view of leadership, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a leader. So one way as a leader to get people to, that's what we've been saying here, is that one way as a leader to get people to be engaged
Mm-hmm.
is to recognize them and appreciate them, right? Is there another way to get people to contribute without recognizing them? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If we had to think. Of course, it's not
Yeah.
easy stuff, of course.
Yeah,
But just,
definitely.
yeah.
I think another way to get people to join you as a leader or like join an organization is by
Okay.
setting an example. And I think the way they can do that, if they don't buy into this idea of like recognizing every single individual, I think another way to still have a very successful leadership group is leading by example, in the sense of having something people believe in, like a message or a statement. And if other people believe into the idea and are excited about the idea, sometimes that's enough to catapult them into wanting to work for you.
Okay.
A message to believe in.
Like a mission.
A mission, yeah.
Right. Okay.
I
So
totally sound like Bernie Sanders. I said a message to believe in. I should have said a future to believe in. And then I'm back to
was
being
that his
Bernie.
motto, a future to believe in?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. So that's another way is get a mission, some sort of statement that inspires people.
Yeah, an idea that inspires people, that is attractive, that basically gravitates people towards you, because they also believe in that idea. They also believe that you would be able to, that your vision would be able to lead them into achieving that goal, and then I think inevitably they will also join.
Right. So, I mean, just talking to you, it seems that leadership is super important to you. Why is that?
Oh, man. I don't even know when it started. So growing up as a kid, my mom always told me that I was very loud and very creative, and I would just start these different ideas and inventions and like ask people to sit and listen, and like I wanted to hear feedback. I had very different instances of leadership. I think in elementary school, I was bullied a lot. I was made fun of. It wasn't a good experience per se. I was in groups that pretended to be inclusive, like little baby stuff, like, you know, like jump rope groups that had a team and a team leader. And I still remember the day of the competition, the main leader kicked me out of the jump rope like show.
Oh, why?
Well, she had held a secret practice with just her friends at her house without telling me, and she said that I didn't know the new routine.
Mm.
And they all were wearing matching outfits, and I mean, I was literally the only Indian student in that team.
Okay.
So I just didn't feel very included.
You felt that they left you out because you're different? You look different?
I think so. I definitely didn't look like them, and they always made fun of how I looked and how my hair smelled, and like, I don't know, it wasn't very fun. And I went to one of my teachers for help, and he was a white man, and he was about as helpful as he could have been, and I understood then that like he wasn't exactly understanding my point. And then I went to he was my 4th grade teacher. Then I went to my 3rd grade teacher, Miss Rousseau, who was this very kind old black woman, and she she told me to call her like grandma, and I still talk to her today, and she's the sweetest thing. And she listened to what I had to say, and she really understood the flaw in like trying to be in a group like that, like in whatever leadership dynamic they thought they had. And she really talked to me about being true and being kind and not compromising those ideals if I ever go into leadership positions. And she explained how...
This was in elementary school?
Yeah.
Jeez, okay. Nice.
Well, I was upset because even as a kid, I was very optimistic, and I was confused why a team leader would act that way. So that's kind of what I asked her. I said, I don't know what I did wrong, but she's the team leader, so technically she has the right to do this to me.
Right. She makes the decisions.
She makes the decisions.
Right.
Like, what can I say about that? And she said, you know how you feel disillusioned right now? Like, try not to ever do that to other people. Like, if you ever are, like, a leader in your life in the future, like, make sure that you treat others the way you want to be treated. And then I went to middle school in India, and it was very Hogwarts-like. I don't know, have you read Harry Potter or watched Harry Potter movies?
Yes. A long time ago.
Okay.
Sure.
So my school had 4 houses.
Okay.
It had a green house, a blue house, a red house, and a yellow house, and a crystal cup that each house would win at the end of the year.
Uh-huh.
You had prefects, assistant prefects, a head boy, a head girl, and you would be in charge of a couple hundred students each. A couple hundred students per each house, starting from pre-K and going all the way to 12th graders. And I was the prefect of Jupiter House, which is the greenhouse.
Okay.
And we sat...
This was a while later, right?
Yeah, this was 7th grade?
Okay.
6th grade, 7th grade? Yeah, this was middle school leadership. And I sat in the leadership boardroom with the other houses, and I pitched this idea of helping our... So there was a village school, right? So my international school was very, like, fancy. Like, it was a really privileged place to be in. And literally right next to us, there was, like, a village school. And while waiting for the bus, I'd often talk to... And I'm from, like, my parents are from a village. Like, I grew up around, like, cows and chickens. So, like, a lot of people who went to that school in India were very dismissive of a lot of those kids, and that really bugged me because, like, I speak Telugu, like fluent Telugu, because my grandparents speak it a lot, so I would often speak it with them, and I'd ask about, you know, like, what their school experience is like, and it just I felt so guilty, and I wanted to do something about it because we had more resources than we can count. We had an entire room of just uniforms and extra computers and extra... Like, so our school would give us every piece of stationery, books, textbooks for free. Like, I wouldn't have to buy anything. Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm sure that came under the school fee.
Right.
But, you know, I had to choose from pencil pouches and choose pencils and choose pens. And it just made me feel so guilty. Like, I didn't feel like I deserved any of that when I was talking to these students.
Right. These were students at another school? Or students at the same...
It was a village school next to my international school. My international school was in a village called Aziz Nagar.
Okay.
And...
So there's these students who have way less resources than you have.
Yeah. It was really frustrating. And especially because my school wasn't doing anything about it. So I started off with a small idea of asking students to donate clothes and stationery and books and pencils, and I also asked the school because we have so many. And I pitched that idea. Everybody liked it. Each house had an advisor. My advisor's name was Shireen ma'am, and she loved the idea. She's like, I think it's great that you are putting things like this as a priority, like we all should. And I set up boxes all around the campus, and people just weren't into it. Like, I tried to talk about it, but I didn't do enough. And
or they weren't into just donating stuff to the other kids?
I mean, there were a couple, but not nearly enough for how many students went there.
Right.
And I wasn't doing enough. Like, I just thought that putting the boxes meant that they would get filled.
Right.
And then after 2 weeks' time, like my time had been up and I was at the board meeting and I sat down and my teacher like asked me to stand up because they're very like in India, like very strict. And she's like, Shivani, stand up. And I stood up, being the little middle schooler that I am. And she basically yelled at me and she said, there's two types of people in the world. There are people who talk big things and, you know, people love it, but they don't do anything about it. And the second kind of person is a person who says big things and lives up to them. Which kind of person do you want to be? Like, point blank asked me in front of all my other head prefects and peers and had me at the board meeting. And it felt like such a slap to my face. And
because she was saying that you're the first type who talks big game and doesn't accomplish anything.
What's happening? It's 2 weeks. The boxes are empty. Like, you're not working.
This was a challenge.
Yeah, she was like, what, you thought the boxes were going to fill themselves? Like,
okay.
You have to put work to make things happen. You can't just have a great idea, put the box there and like expect people to magically like, you know, get involved. You have to follow up with people. You have to announce things. You have to, you know, send out emails. Like, you can't just expect things to work out because you said it once.
Uh-huh.
And I told her I wanted to be the second kind of person. And then she said, then prove it. She ended the meeting. And I'm a brown person and I turned pink that day. Like, I was so embarrassed. And I mean,
she's exactly what you needed, isn't she?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. She's exactly what I think I needed. And then I announced during assembly, And during assembly, what I did is I pulled one of the boxes onto stage and I dropped some clothes and books in there and I said, this is what needs to happen. I don't see this happening. And a part of it is my fault because I haven't been incentivizing students. I haven't been talking to students. I haven't been promoting this enough. And I apologize to everyone about this, but there is a stark difference in how we're living our lives and how the school next door is like living their lives. And we have enough resources that we shouldn't be greedy with them. The day we took stuff to the school, the boxes were ripping.
Overflowing.
And now those students come over to our campus and they use our computer labs. They're just
up till now? Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah. Nice. There's another program that another one of my friends created after me called the CAS program. And we fundraise a shit ton of money. We fundraise so much money. That school, we like helped paint the school. That school has solar panels now. Like, those students are our students now. They go to that school, like basically the school that I went to. They have the uniforms. They have access to all of our stationery, and so many people. And then I moved back here, but every now and then I go back and I like talk to those students. And a lot of students that go to my school now, like back in India, also teach them like math and English in Telugu. So we speak Telugu. That's our native language there. And a lot of students, I think all the students in the village also speak Telugu. And yeah, I think that was the kick that I needed to like, to like put me into place for like what kind of leader I wanted to be. And like, that's when I realized that leadership is so important to me because not only was I able to sort of shape what kind of leader I wanted to be, but I was able to inspire so many other kids who did an even better job than I ever did with the one little drive that I did. Like, now there's a program, like they are taught by our professors. There's no longer that like weird stigma anymore. And it's like a tiny, and again, maybe this is Pitzer's fault. Even now, I find myself saying, like, this is just a tiny step forward because, you know, the rest of India is not doing this. Like, there's very little people in little closed spaces doing good things.
Right.
And sometimes, like, obviously that's not enough. And I know the Pitzer student in me is, like, recognizing that there's so many other problems out there. But
you're trying to do something on a global scale that's noticed by the media and stuff.
No, not noticed by the media. I think what Pitzer, like, the Pitzer person in me is saying, like, that's such a small victory. Like, you know, like, that's just, you know, in your backyard. Like, you have to do bigger, do better. And while that's true, I think there's such a benefit to starting small. Like, start in your own backyard. Like, stop trying to save the world. Like, do it baby steps, you know?
Well, yeah, but if you start a program that eventually leads other people to start bigger programs and eventually help members of an entire school have access to computer lab and education, that doesn't seem small, does it? It's
I don't know. I feel like
right. It's like kickstarting something. How could that be small?
It's not small. I think Pitzer's chipped a little, or like college, or the world has chipped a little bit of my optimism, because for every good deed that I see happening, for every awesome person doing amazing things in the world, like, I think by virtue of having my cell phone at my fingertips, and I talked to my friend about this, she was talking to me today about how also easily accessible bad news is.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's disheartening because, like, obviously I want to keep going, I want to keep doing good things, but, like, sometimes getting the news 5 seconds after something happens, or, like, you know, you did this good thing in this step, and, like, just the other day, like, someone did something terrible, and it's just, like, you really have to learn to be resilient.
Okay. How so? Why do you need to learn to be resilient here?
Because it's so easy to give up. Because there are, like, there's so many, like, I don't even want to talk about this, but, like, Brock Turner, for example, right?
Brock Turner? What is that?
He was, he's a rapist, first of all.
Okay.
But the way it was...
From this century, or?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
He went to Stanford.
Okay.
And the way...
Was it the student, the swimmer? Okay.
Yeah. And basically, he was able to pay out of serving as much as he should have served, right? Mm-hmm. So it comes back to that. It comes back to, like, I see so many of my peers and myself, like, doing these things, these really good things in the world, and trying to make, you know, little positive dents here and there and here and there. But with how accessible some of the flaws in the system are by virtue of having, you know, apps and phones and technology, like, it's overwhelming. Like, I hear so much bad news, like, every day. President Trump did this, like, the environmental, like, representative doesn't know what she's talking about, like, she didn't even know what global warming was, like, you see so many people now coming out saying that they openly, like, they admit to openly, like, sexually assaulting women, and you see so many things. It can be emotionally draining sometimes.
Right, and it's around you, and your phone gives you access to all this information.
Yeah, I was talking to my friend about, like,
the good and the bad.
And
Mostly
ugly.
the bad.
The good, the bad, and the ugly. And, like, sometimes, like, the benefits of unplugging, because sometimes it's so disheartening. It's like you're trying to, like, do good and, like, be a positive influence and help others, and you open your phone and you see, like, 12 bad things, like another mass shooting, like this and that, and it's just, like, it takes a lot of resilience and emotional fortitude to keep going. And on some days, it's so hard to want to do anything but just do nothing.
Okay, so these negative events like affect you a lot emotionally.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
I think that's what I was trying to get at when I was talking about, like, Pitzer or college here in general. Because I've learned that it's important to be knowledgeable. It's important to know about world news. It's important to know about local news. It's important to have knowledge and stay informed. But sometimes that knowledge can just be really overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, some days are just so hard because of how evident it is of how broken some systems of justice are.
Well, like the prison system and...
Yeah, or, like, gun control, dude. Like, how have we not learned that is necessary? Like, there's so many countries that have gun control laws, and, like, they don't have mass shootings anymore.
Yeah.
Like, they just don't. And there's so many issues. Like, it's not just gun control. It's, like, the justice system. It's, like lawyers specifically there for, like, domestic violence cases and like so many people I see trying, but they're also, and I think that ties around to like recognizing and thanking people for their work, because sometimes it's so hard to push through. Like sometimes resilience can also come from being recognized and saying, hey, hang in there. I know everything sucks, but if you weren't there doing what you do, that would be one less person fighting against the system. And that's why I think it's so important, because there's so many things that make it so easy to give up. Because fighting and staying afloat and having like enough confidence to continue to push through is a lot of emotional effort.
Right. So I guess the question is, well, I mean, if we view the system as like very corrupt and mostly just bad stuff happening, then of what value is any good in it? Isn't it just like proportion-wise, right? Okay, sure, you build a shelter.
Yeah.
But there's corruption and someone's going to steal the money. Why do any good at all, right?
Because for me personally, like grassroots momentum can sort of tackle corruption from the bottom up instead of the top down.
Okay.
And I think the top down is harder because of how much power and privilege they have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you slowly like turn the rocks from like the bottom, like for example, flipping the Senate, right? Making sure that we get Democrats up in there. I think a lot of things, if we use like grassroots techniques and do baby steps, like we can slowly but surely, in my positive mind, like tackle the inconsistencies and problems of the system. I think it's harder doing it from the top down, though.
Okay, because the leaders they're too powerful and they're too corrupt already.
They're too powerful. They have the means to escape any form of like accusations. Whereas if you slowly like change the policymakers, change the people who write the policy, change the judges, like you're slowly, like one day people are going to realize that the laws have been changed. For example, if we had enough push of people for like gun laws, for example, we would have to, instead of like trying to appeal to the government, who clearly doesn't give a damn because of the NRA, like the NRA, they're so powerful.
What's that, the National Revenue Authority?
No, the
No.
No.
Like, what is NRA?
Like, who control the arms and guns and ammunitions and make it super easy to get. Like, it's so easy to get a gun here.
Okay. So if gun control, if like people aren't allowed to carry guns, that would affect NRA financially, right? They wouldn't have enough money. Is that does their survival depend on having guns?
It's just like gun lobbying, basically, is what they do. And
They lobby against guns or for guns?
No, they're for guns. They they love their guns. They want to keep their guns. They want to like protect America's like right to bear arms and all that.
Okay.
So they see it as a threat to like America by having gun control, because we're fringing upon their Second Amendment rights, which is the right to bear arms. And a lot of the arguments are usually like, if a bad guy comes, like, I want to be armed too. And I think an argument that they're not understanding is, if a bad guy comes and a bad guy just has a knife as opposed to a machine gun, there's going to be a very different type of damage that happens. Machine gun can spray so many bullets, so quickly, like Vegas, for example. Like, if that guy had a knife on him, like, he could have been stopped. But with something as powerful as, like, a machine gun, which apparently you can get super easily in America, like, there just aren't the same rules. It's not held to the same standard as a lot of other things. And what shocks me is that people are just in such denial. It's not even ignorance, because there's countries like Australia, like, who have gun laws, and they haven't had mass shootings in forever. So I think it's not ignorance, it's denial that they just want to stick and hug to their guns. Like, that's it.
Mm. Well, yeah, so we've outlined, like, tons of problems. So, like...
Yeah. So many things to talk about.
Right. We've outlined problems in, there's gun control, Then there is the presidency, politics in the country, right? There's like corrupt government officials. There's so many problems. And like, if one looks left and right, it's just ever compounding set of problems. Right. So, and one suggestion was that maybe we could tackle these problems through like some sort of grassroots thing, right? It's like from bottom up sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right. So let's say that we actually succeeded on a grassroots level. What would a properly functioning system look like? Does that make sense?
I mean, with regards to a lot of things that we talked about, like I could talk specifically on how that would look like for gun control or how that would look like for the justice system. But what I envision is if you have for example, there's a lot of students right now who are passionate about politics and they're passionate about different issues. So some of them, and the benefit of having all of them go into politics is that some of them are going to focus on gun control. Others are going to focus on the justice system as a whole. Others want to become judges, actually, and not even politicians. So by putting those people in places of power, what I think and hope will happen is you will mitigate the amount of corruption that happens because people who I see that are interested and passionate about this hold certain values that are inconsistent with concepts like bribing or concepts like paying your way out of the system. Because these are people who want to fix the system from preventing those kind of corrupt acts to happen. So what I envision is by having it start in a grassroots kind of way, slowly but surely, we're going to fill these little positions and basically create a movement where we almost pull the rug from underneath people who were complacent and comfortable in a system that works to their privilege and resources and money. Because right now, things are very reactionary. Like, they think that we are going to, try to yell at Trump again on Twitter or something, or go into a Facebook comment war. And I think...
Start a protest.
I think there is some importance to protests, though. Like, I think in conjunction with protests, we must also have people who have the capacity to, and who are able to focus their time and effort on changing the way the law works. Because it can't be just one or the other. And that's what I was talking to my friend the other day. Because he was like, he also wanted to be a lawyer, but then he realized he didn't want to rule on the laws. He wanted to change it. And I said, well, that's awesome, But it can't just be one grassroots thing that we fix. Like, he can change the law, but if the person who is in charge of interpreting the law is corrupt, they can interpret it how they want to. Sometimes they do have that power. And if the attorney is, not ethical, they can swing the argument however they want and if the jury is filled with people who are also corrupt. So there's different things that need to happen. There's different positions that need to be filled. It's not just one.
Okay. So we're saying that this has to be a joint effort. Part of it is going to be, protests. The other part is going to be placing people in particular positions. So like some people working, right, like in legislation, in different branches of government, in all sorts of areas. Okay, so there's this thing that happens sometimes where people flip, or people start out with good intentions and then get corrupted. So if we place people in all of these positions, right? So like, let's say we want to change the system and decide we're going to get someone and put them in a position. Let's say we're going to direct someone to be a judge or something, become a judge and change the system that way.
Yeah.
Right. Now, what do we do about, how can we be sure that they're not going to become a judge and then flip and just join the corrupt system? How can we prevent against that? Because, one thing we're saying was, okay, well, they have solid values. We've seen the values, but who knows what can happen to someone in 10 years?
Yeah, who knows? Like, what if they flip? I think that's a really...
Right, how do we deal with that?
No, that's a really important question that I don't think I have an answer to. Because a lot of the times when people are appointed or elected, and I mean, if they're appointed, we hope to God that the people making the informed decision are doing so with the best interests of everyone they're representing. And if that's the case, we have to hope that because that's the system we follow, that system will work in our favor. I mean, there's no knowing if someone decides one day to suddenly flip, but I think a way that we can avoid that to some extent is creating a culture where I think morality, kindness, acceptance are not just celebrated, but normalized more. So they wouldn't find that, because oftentimes, like, it's just a good faith belief and hope that this person who ends up in this position, who said all these nice things, doesn't suddenly switch and become an evil, overlord, power-hungry person. Mm-hmm. And there's no 100% foolproof way to prevent that. But I think there are little things, especially in the way I see leadership, of like constant recognition, making sure that everyone feels valued, making sure that we create a culture where we normalize kindness, we expect kindness, we show kindness, and I think the fifth thing is we hope that we receive it in return. We just create a culture where we treat others how we want to be treated.
Okay.
And we expect that they do that in return. And there's no way to say for sure that they don't. I think we can at least try to create a culture where they will want to. Right.
And maybe going back to, so we mentioned something about history repeating itself.
Yeah.
So
eerie.
So, like, I mean, is it implausible to think that maybe even the people we have in power right now, mm-hmm. right, at some time were around our age, right, and like, let's say the hippie generation, etc., mm-hmm. right, they also wanted to change the system, mm-hmm. and they started out with great intentions, and yet we're complaining about them now and how corrupt this, because they're basically right, it's like the generation is now in control, and they ended up like corrupt and having a system that we're not really proud of, right? Aren't we also kind of starting similar to them, in a position where we're super hopeful, we want to change things, but eventually down the road, 25 years later,
25 years later.
Yeah, right. We're just, the next generation, our children are complaining about how freaking misguided we all are, and they're going to change things.
I mean, I think that's a good
Does it feel like a cycle, or?
I think it could be a cycle. I think that's one thing that we talked about. But if people are always complaining to change things for the better, to me that sounds like a trajectory for the best. Because what was perceived as better 25 years ago, we're, like you said, we're experiencing that, but we feel like it still needs to be better. And 25 years after that, people will say, no, it still needs to be better. So I feel like that attitude is only going to be helpful in the restricted sense that I'm talking about. Better as in like a more loving, accepting, inclusive, representative society. So,
right.
So to me, that sounds like we could be more inclusive. Let's be better 25 years from now. 25 years from now, we could be more diverse. Let's try better. Like 25 years from now, we could be more representative. Let's try better. Let's try better. Like that just seems like it's going in an upwards trajectory. Like
okay.
We will never end racism, but I actually talked about this in my AP US history class. We will never end racism. We will never be completely free from being biased, but we can educate the people around us and at least have the racism trend go downwards. And every now and then, yes, we see spikes with, for example, the Trump administration, which is, I think, a huge can of worms in and of itself as far as that presidential election goes, and how some people felt, how some people felt unheard, how they didn't feel valued, and they felt that they couldn't vote for anybody besides Trump. So surprisingly, it boils down to some of the most like the basic traits that we talked about. It's this feeling of being cheated, betrayed, undervalued, not heard. And there's so many books about like why the election happened the way it did, and it's surreal even talking about that election, and sometimes I just go off track, so I don't even know where I am right now or what the question was.
Okay, that's fine. So no, we're just talking about once again we're talking about this idea that maybe we're stuck in a cycle, and we think we're going to make things better, but things are just going to be as screwed up when our kids show up later in college around our age. And so the idea you were talking about was, well, maybe we're looking at it as more of we're improving, right? And it's a good thing that we always think we can make things better. So maybe the view there was that so society is progressively getting better, and it's now our job to make it a little better and the next people a little better, right? So would you say society is better now than it was before?
Well, I think with the Trump administration, that sentence
it's gone back.
Okay. It's not. No, society's not doing so great, but society has never been doing so great. I think the only thing that Trump did was give a mic and platform to people who were a little scared about being as vocal about their moral compass. I think Trump legitimized hate, and Trump legitimized, or basically added fuel to the rather quiet. Like, I think a lot more people are more comfortable now being openly hateful and racist because Trump is basically telling them that they can and that he's also going to be like that. So, I mean, monkey see, monkey do. We have an uprise of hate crimes, and they've always existed, but people are less afraid now, or the people that commit them, I see at least, are less afraid now. They're more confident. They have, the President of the United States backing them up. So that's the downside as far as the current state of situations.
So are we saying that this hate, this presidency simply, the hate was always there, and this presidency amplified it, or did the presidency create the hate?
I mean, Trump did create and say a lot of hateful things, but racism existed far before Trump, and hate speech existed before Trump.
Okay.
What I see now is a lot of people thinking they have free reign and a mic, or like a louder mic. There are more mics, for I think a better analogy would be.
Okay, so hate was given, it was always there, but was given a sort of microphone, amplified.
Yeah, and now Trump's providing more mics.
It's now become okay, right? Well, before people were hiding it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, and I've seen videos and interviews of a lot of people saying they've never been so comfortable being vocal about it, but because they're like quoted, like quote unquote, Lord and Savior Trump is like aligning their values, and he's basically legitimizing their thought process, they feel more comfortable saying all the hate speech, and they're just not afraid.
So, I mean, there are many ways to view like government and society and our problems, right? One of the ways to view our problems is, well, just in terms of like political institutions and how society is screwed up. That's one way to view it. Another way to think about our problems is that they stem from the very base human emotions. So, for instance, we could talk about a corrupt system, but that's really greed. We could talk about people attacking each other. That's really fear, right? Those kinds of emotions, like the base emotions, like greed, the need to be super forceful, the need to crush others, the need to take advantage of others. Those emotions right there. is there any way we can ever restructure society so that there's no more greed? Would we want that, by the way, that there's no more greed and there's no more? Would that represent a society? What's the question here? If we try to restructure the government and the system without ever tackling these more base emotions like greed and fear, could we ever make a good society?
No, I think we do need to understand that a lot of things do stem from human nature. And some of those traits are greed and fear. And sometimes people act the way they do because the underlying cause is they're afraid. And sometimes they're afraid that they aren't being heard, so they have to be greedy because they're not being given their equal share. Therefore, they will resort to being greedy. So it's kind of... I think what you said is correct. Like, the root of it does stem from human nature and does stem from a lot of qualities that we have as humans. But I think going off of that, one of the most important things that I've seen happen on campus is dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
There was an event a couple students and I hosted where people from all walks of the political spectrum sat in the same room and talked policy. So I got to talk with like a couple of Trump supporters. You know, there were people who were moderate, people who were like very hard-leaning left. They had some liberals, and it was a really useful conversation because those conversations never happen because there's so much hate and animosity. And I've gained so many different perspectives and actually even changed some opinions of some people after like having that conversation. But I never would have had that dialogue if I was always in a mentality of I will not talk to the people whom I have a problem with. And I think once you do that, you sort of touch on some of the things that you talked about, like our humane traits and wants and needs. And I think one of them is a want to be valued and heard.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to be heard. Like, we want to be valued. We want to feel like we're important. We want to feel like our words matter. And when having dialogues like that, everyone in the room felt like they're... Well, for the first talk that I went to, we all were listening and we heard each other and we reacted to what one another was saying. And it was really useful because for the first time I saw people from really different ends of the political spectrum that wouldn't otherwise be in a room, let alone talk to each other.
Right.
And I think that opened a lot of minds and people were respectful. Like the way the first talk went, I was really, really happy. Because I think we were able to tap into something that was deeper than just politics, and that was human nature. Like, why do we think the way we do? What's the internal thing tugging at that belief to go in a certain direction? And talking about that was really, really helpful for me.
Right. So one thing was so we're saying here is the whole idea of getting people and allowing them to have a dialogue is really helpful. Which now begs the question, can dialogue, so like let's say you and I have a dialogue, we talk about something, and let's say, you change my point of view on an issue, right? And maybe I begin to see it differently, right? The question is just whether dialogue can end things like hate or fear or greed, like the base emotions that make us really treat each other badly. Is just a curiosity about whether is there any form of dialogue that can tackle those things like hate and fear, the base emotions.
Oh yeah, I've seen it happen. Like this respectful and compassionate dialogue where active listening happens, where you're not listening to respond, but you're listening to listen and understand where they're coming from. For example, I've had a talk with someone who was very homophobic, and I was explaining to them how by choosing to remove the entire LGBTQIA plus section on the whitehouse.gov, the website.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Literally, It was a day after the election. Erased so many people's identities. And this one person came up to me and said, just because I voted for Trump, you can't say that I hate gay people because I don't believe that. And this person asked me to explain why a lot of people think that of this person.
Mm-hmm.
This person was like, can you tell me why people like put me in this box because I don't? And I had a very meaningful conversation with this person where I explained that if a government decides to tell you that you literally don't exist, removes resources that they once had for you, and doesn't recognize you as a person. So I sort of asked this person to put themselves in a position where someone just told them that they don't exist, that they can't get married, that they can't have children, that they can't have access to health care. And I asked them, how would they feel if someone said all those things to them? And they responded pretty shitty. I said, okay, that's good. Like, you would feel pretty shitty. Now imagine if someone did that to an entire group of people. And even though you don't believe that about yourself, and you don't believe that about the LGBTQIA plus like community, and you say you don't, by voting for someone who did that, you are in essence also making that statement, because that is not something that a queer person, for example, who wanted to support Trump in some weird alternate reality, that's not something that they could separate. Because that choice from the Trump administration to remove rights and to remove the page and basically not acknowledge that queer people exist, like, they don't have that choice or that luxury to say, yeah, I actually like him for his economic policies, but I don't like him for this.
Right.
Because this has to do with their identity. It has to do with who they are.
He's challenged their identity or denied it.
Yeah. And then I said, you wouldn't like your friend if your friend said that he supported you in everything besides, like, in your academics and in your sports, but he doesn't acknowledge you as a person. You couldn't separate those two things, because the third thing is pretty damn important.
Yeah, it's who you are.
It's who you are. So it doesn't matter if he cares about how good you are in academics or, how great of a sports player you are, because the third thing is so egregious that it doesn't matter. You can't overlook the first two, because the third is so horrible. And It has to do with who you are. And for the first time, this person, kind of opened their eyes and said, oh my God,
Was it like one of those moments of realization?
Yeah, it was really awesome. And, I sat and I listened to, not Trump policies, but I've heard of, other economic policies from the Republican Party. And, it was an exchange of dialogue in its finest sense, and it did achieve something that, a lot of people are a bit skeptical of dialogue ever achieving, but it can totally happen. It's not easy, but it comes again from making sure people feel like they're valued and being heard, and you're actually actively listening to what they're saying. And if you check those boxes, you can have a really fruitful discussion.
Right. Okay. So, no, the example about the homophobic person, your conversation with them, that's really interesting. So, do you think it's the dialogue itself is the dialogue itself the one that's leading to this understanding? Or is it the fact that you're actively listening to the person?
I think actively listening should be a key feature of dialogue.
What if we just didn't have dialogue and only active listening? Would that work in terms of...
I think that's what dialogue is, though.
Active listening? Interesting. Yeah. Never thought of that before.
Because,
how are they the same?
Because dialogue usually involves two people talking. That's how we advertise it. That's how we talk about it.
Yes.
But I think the most important things that happen in dialogue are the moments when people are actively listening. Because if you're just talking at each other, that is not proper dialogue. Because dialogue in its finest sense is two people in a conversation. And I don't think it can be justified as a conversation if there's no active listening.
I see. Okay. So you're saying, are we saying here that dialogue is, basically dialogue cannot happen without active listening?
I don't think it's dialogue.
It's not even a dialogue, right? By definition, it stops being a dialogue. Right. Yeah. It's weird. No, that makes a lot of sense. It's, so, I mean, why do you think dialogue has such a huge impact? Okay, let's just focus on the component of active listening. Of course, active listening has to be for dialogue to really make sense.
Yeah.
But why is the active listening part so important in terms of getting people to, like, at least temporarily, not be hateful and be at peace, a sort of peace and love? I don't know if you've experienced this. What's so special about active listening that it does this? Question makes sense?
Yeah, it does. It totally does.
Okay.
I think what active listening does is, in its finest sense, like my third grade teacher said, it treats others how you want to be treated. Like when I'm talking, I really want someone to not just hear what I'm saying, but to listen to what I'm saying and to take it in. And I think by having active listening be a part of the definition of dialogue, what you're essentially doing is you're promising that you're not just hearing what this person is saying, but you're promising that you're listening and that you're taking in and absorbing what this person is saying. And when someone feels like what they're saying matters, they will feel more inclined to listen to you. And that's when you can complete the second part of dialogue, which is the other person.
Right.
Because otherwise the connection stops there. It stops after the first person. But if the second person is actively listening, you're tapping into one of our basic human desires of wanting to be valued and heard. And it sounds so simple, but like I forget to be an active listener sometimes. Sometimes I'm just thinking, oh, I know what I'm going to say next. And you just have to remind yourself that that's not the thing that's going to make this conversation great. No matter how great you think your response is, what's even better is making sure that the person that's talking understands that you're actually listening to them.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's what active listening achieves. Because it tells the other person at a very human, basic sense that I'm absorbing what you're saying. I'm absorbing every word, and a lot of that has to do with like verbal cues, like looking at them when you're talking, nodding. Like, we see this with our parents. Like, I tell my mom about a party I'm going to, and she won't even listen to me. She'll be like, yeah. And then, like, day of the party, I'll be going. She's like, where are you going? Like, I told you, I'm going to the party. So it's that thing where people know and recognize that, yeah, my words are being valued right now. And when that happens, you can achieve, compassion and understanding and other things. And if you can't, at least you've achieved two people who otherwise could have disagreed on so many other things, listening to each other and coming to the table, which in and of itself is a big achievement. Even if they don't change their mind, they're at least coming to the table and listening to each other, which doesn't happen anymore.
Right. Why does it feel so good to be listened to? That's just begs the question.
Because we like to think we're important. I don't know.
Are we saying it makes us... It makes
us feel valued. It makes us feel like our words have some meaning to people other than ourselves. It's usually a very good... I think, for me at least, I often talk or tell my friends things and I say, I think this is a good idea, but can you tell me if this is? And I usually expect an honest answer. So if it's not, then I'll know that they're listening, they've processed it, and they're being honest. And if it is a good answer, then they're listening, and they also agree, so now I know. So Either way, you sort of achieve this sense of truth, because otherwise you're just talking to yourself, and you don't get a lot of diverse opinions then.
Okay, have you ever, been talking with someone and then they listen to you and then you feel like this joy inside, even possibly a smile, and wondered why the heck the smile is there. just asking. It's because it's happened to us before. So
it sometimes, even when it's not as obvious, like when people don't say like, "Hello, I'm going to be actively listening to you right now." You just sort of, like you said, by the end of a good conversation, you'll know, like you'll feel it in your heart that person listened to you, and now you're smiling because they gave you not just their time, but also their mind and their thoughts, and that's a really good feeling because, again, like you feel valued, and I think letting people know that they're valued is important.
Right. Do you ever view a conversation as a spiritual experience? And if you've gone that far, who knows? Are you spiritual, by the way, or religious, that sort of thing?
Oh God, you're just opening a can of worms. I don't even know what time it is anymore. So I was born and raised a Hindu. But Hinduism, by virtue of being very open, I guess, it never restricted me from going to church, from going to a mosque. So by virtue of where I lived, like Hyderabad, it was 50% Hindu, 50% Muslim. A lot of my friends would invite me over to pray with them at a mosque, and I would totally do that, and it was never seen as like a threat to my religion. Okay. So I also prayed in church.
So you're Hindu?
I think I pray to all gods.
Okay.
So like I've gone to Jain temples, I've gone to Buddhist temples, I've gone to Hindu temples, I've gone to mosques, I've gone to churches.
Right.
I've not been to a synagogue yet, but I plan to. And it's just...
Why do you go to all these different religious houses?
So I'm not like cryptically religious in that I don't follow even some of the things that Hinduism says that, if you don't drink this water at this time today and well,
you have such stuff
in holy coconut water, like I don't believe in that, but
right.
A consistent theme I've seen in reading parts of different religious texts is they kind of just tell you how not to be a shitty person. And since I see that in all the religions, I respect all of the religions, and I can do things like going to a church on Christmas and pray to Jesus and, go through that entire process while not feeling like I'm being a bad Hindu. I'm not even sure if I am a Hindu because technically I don't follow a lot of the things that they say. I mean, I pray, I celebrate religious holidays, but I also celebrate other religious holidays.
Right.
And it's weird because it's also hypocritical of me because some of the religions that I respect and pray with every now and then are monotheistic.
Right.
And others are polytheistic.
Yeah.
So it's this weird thing that I have to get over because I've sort of created my own cherry-picked religion of, I'm going to take this because I believe this, it's good to be kind to other people, and I like this about this religion, and this religion says, be honest, and I like this. So I just enjoy reading religious texts almost like literature and then seeing them as books to guide how I treat other people with respect and honesty and kindness. And because I see that as a common theme, I've never, looked down at any religion. I've been very, open to learning about them and, if I'm allowed to, pray through that religion as well. So, yeah, religion and I have a weird relationship. So many of my friends are like, oh, it's such a cop-out. You're just cherry-picking anything you want. That's not religion.
Right.
You might as well make your own religion. So I don't know. I know I'm religious. I know I pray. But I don't know if I can say I'm 100% Hindu because, I also believe in Jesus Christ. I pray to Jesus Christ. I'm also a Hindu. And maybe that's in the definition of being a Hindu. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Okay. So, but does that mean you at least have a belief in God? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And does that, other than just attending, let's say, churches, or you haven't gone to a synagogue yet, but going to mosques and stuff, how does your belief in God affect your day-to-day actions? If you you may or may not be.
Well, a lot of it, like I said before, was just from the text that I've read, a lot of it just explains how to be kind and courteous and respectful and honest. So a lot of these things are things that I see my parents teaching me, like as I grew up. So it has never been hard for me to incorporate what I wanted to, take from religion, because the good things that I liked about reading religious texts were primarily that they wanted me to be the best version of myself that I could be, and to help others if I'm in a position of privilege, and to recognize my privilege and basically be as helpful as possible, try to be a good Samaritan, and sometimes just help others without expecting anything in return, but also like making sure people feel loved at the same time. It just went hand in hand with how my parents raised me, so it was never a conflict really to integrate that.
Okay. Oh, I see. So you go to different religions, you pick out like the good stuff you like about them, right?
That makes me sound so bad. You only pick the good stuff. I mean, yeah.
No, well, why is that bad?
No, it's
why
not
would
bad.
you pick the bad stuff?
No, not the way that I pick the bad stuff, but by like picking whatever I want, I think it contradicts my assertion that I am from that religion. It especially, my argument breaks, I think, with the presence of monotheistic religions.
Right,
because one of the main doctrines is like there is only one God and it's this God.
Right, Jesus is the way. There are no other way. He is the only way,
yeah,
the truth.
So a lot of people are like,
right.
It's admirable what you're doing, but how do you know you're being true to like Christianity when you also believe in Hindu gods? Because Christianity says there's one guy. So what? Like, how do you reconcile that? And the thing is, I don't know.
So what do you do? That's a good question.
I don't have an answer. I don't think I reconcile that, because I kind of hope that the gods are like, she's trying to be a nice person. She's like reading our text. We'll just let it happen.
Are you trying to like get all the gods to approve of you? Is that is what
like,
you're trying to do?
I don't know what they're thinking. Like, I've never
in case it's Jesus,
I like don't have God on speed dial. Like, I'm just gonna continue trying to be nice and kind and considerate and take from religion what I will, because religion for a lot of people is hope.
Hope of what?
I mean, hope when they're scared, when things are going bad. Usually people will pray to God because everything on earth just doesn't have a good enough answer, whereas God is like this hypothetically all-powerful being. So it's like a sense of calmness and a sense of like, and sometimes, there's situations where I'm like, oh, God will fix this, and then, things don't get fixed, and I'm like a little bit confused, but also like, again, I don't have God on speed dial. I don't know what God's mission is. So at the end of the day, at least having that hope and guidance is still worth it. Like it overpowers any counter arguments for people who say like, how do you know there is a God? Sometimes you ask God for something, you don't get it, then what? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not here to like question what God's doing. I'm just taking the good stuff and trying to live my life, and that's enough for me.
Okay. God's not there to like give you hope. You don't view God as a...
Oh, I definitely do, but there's also situations where I have to concede that like sometimes I'll ask God for, things that I hope will eventually happen that don't happen. Like mass shootings. Like, of course I don't want them to happen. Of course, every time one happens, I'm like, oh God, please don't make another happen. Like, please.
And you're usually serious in this prayer, or you just, it's a statement?
No, like serious, because obviously like that much pain and suffering in the world is just so terrible and horrible, but it happens. And it happens because I think we let it happen. And I think hope is good to have, but leaving everything to God is not sensible.
You feel there's some stuff God can't handle?
Maybe God's busy.
He's all powerful.
Yeah, no, I actually wrote a paper on this.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I did. I wrote a philosophy paper on this. I said, you have to give, so for the restricted definition of God being all-powerful, like omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent, I called it the Goldilocks model. I said you can't have all three, because if you have to concede one, because if God is everywhere and God can predict everything and God is benevolent all the time, then God would predict a tsunami and could be powerful enough to stop a tsunami and is benevolent enough to want to stop the tsunami, but tsunamis happen anyway. which means you have to let one of those things go. You either have to say, God is benevolent, he still is benevolent, he obviously would have wanted to help.
But he can't stop a tsunami.
But,
okay, keep going.
But then if you let go of omnipresent, then you can say, but God can't be everywhere all the time, so that's why, God didn't stop the tsunami. He's still, God is still benevolent.
Right.
All loving. God is still,
omnipotent.
Still knew the tsunami was coming, but
he just wasn't there. He was somewhere else.
I said, that was the paper. I said you can't have all three. I said you pick two, because the minute you try picking three, you have to admit that God does not exist. At least the God that people are trying to paint that have three.
How about this possibility? He has all three, but the things that we think are bad are really good.
Yeah, that was also an argument. I actually did a reading about this where someone said that, it's suffering is maybe suffering is good, because suffering shapes us to be a better person. And the one really strong counter argument to that was suffering. So that argument works under the premise that not everything is bad, it shapes you for the better. How does an infant dying from a drone attack shape anyone for the better?
Yeah, that's a good question. If we thought really hard, could we find a reason of how it shaped someone's life?
Not a reason that society here would agree with.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of those weird objective things that we can say, there's probably not.
Not a reason.
No, life-altering, amazing lesson.
How about, okay, we just run out of time. Ta-da. Yeah. Well, no, that's interesting. Just, I guess, how about, there was a pilot driving a drone, and he was this guy who was gonna drive drones all over, and then he kills a kid, horrible event, and he thinks to himself, holy shit, what did I just do? And never kills again, or never goes into a drone again. Not a good event, obviously, it's a bad event. But isn't it good that he's not gonna get into another drone again?
Yes, but then you have to talk about the cost of the kid's life. Was that unnecessary?
Was that worth it?
Yeah. Couldn't he have just come to that decision without having killed a kid? Couldn't he have just read a book about another person who did that and then learned from the book? Why did he have to kill someone to learn that? Yeah. And that someone is a child. So that the objection that was in the paper that I read was...
this is for a paper, right?
Yeah. Okay. The prevalence of... What was it called? The prevalence of needless suffering, basically. Really bad, horrible things that happen to, young kids, for example, is a really prevalent example in the paper. They said, what reason could one possibly have to say that they have learned a lot from, a mass shooting of Sandy Hook Elementary School? What? We still have mass shootings.
Yeah.
So the argument there is not as strong, but the overall argument of we don't know, what if that's a good thing too? It's just not something that our society can understand. Maybe God can, I don't know.
Yeah, it's really hard stuff, of course. If you look at the human body, apparently there's there are lots of stuff in our body that are bacteria and viruses, and they're always in conflict with each other. But because they're in conflict with each other, our body is able to be healthy. And there's all sorts of conflicts that happen. Let's say someone had a really horrible childhood, right? He always felt neglected all the time. Nobody ever cared about him. And this somehow pushes him to the brink, and he realizes, holy shit, I gotta be self-sufficient. And then from there we have a really powerful leader who's able to make his own decisions, is very empathetic, and the empathy directly came from that childhood, or something like that. But anyways, yeah, it's complicated stuff, but it does raise the question, how do we know whether something is good or bad? How can we tell? Especially if we just heard it. Without knowing the future.
This is all of my philosophy papers. The one that I just submitted
yeah.
talked about this. So there's this guy named Derek Parfit, who wrote something called the non-identity problem.
Okay.
And he's basically trying to grapple with, if certain things hadn't happened to us in our life, we wouldn't be who we are.
Yeah.
And his first premise, he calls it like the time dependence claim, and it basically says if we were not conceived within a month of when we were actually conceived, like, sperm, egg, zygote, that whole thing, within a month of when we were conceived, it would be a completely different person. Because it would be a new sperm, a new egg. It would be a completely new process. And what he talks about is he has this example of a Holocaust survivor. His name is Frankel something, and this guy says...
George Frankel. No. Okay.
Something Frankel. I don't remember his first name. And he says, because of what he has gone through, his life has shaped for the better.
He wrote a book?
I think so. Like he is stronger for it. He is better for it. And this guy comes along named, I think, James Woodward, who says... who says that you can say all you want that your life was made for the better, but you cannot deny that your rights as a human were violated. So you were still wronged, even though you say it wasn't a harm to you. So that was a really interesting argument to me, because I'm writing a paper.
So you don't get to determine these things.
Well, you can say that it benefited you, like
right. But it still doesn't take away the fact that it wronged you.
Yeah, because objectively, the people in the concentration camp wronged him.
But did they?
They made them from a rights perspective. Of course. From a rights perspective, they have.
They killed a lot of people, children, experimentation, right?
So you can say
Nazi Germany, right?
Yes. So they have still. So what James Woodward is saying is they have wronged him because they violated his rights, and he can say that he's made for the better. Like, James Woodward will allow you that. He said, keep it. You can say that you were like bettered from it, but that is irrelevant because they've wronged your rights, which is different from saying like they made you better off. They can still make you better off, but they still wronged your rights. You have to concede that your rights as a person were wronged because there was no consent. And I'm writing a paper right now about parents who hit their children, like families of color. And I'm basically saying, like, there's a ton of students who I know, like my friends, who have also been hit as a kid. Like, it's a pretty normal thing. Your parents, like, smack you to, like, tell you good from bad to shape you into a good person.
Right.
And there are a lot of kids who believe that they are better because their parents hit them. So what I'm arguing in the paper is, yeah, sure. Like, you can say that. You can say that you're a better person, and I believe you that if you tell me it's because they hit you, fine, but from solely a restricted rights violation argument, your rights were violated.
Right.
Because you didn't say, come hit me, and they didn't say, like, can I hit you? They just hit you when you did something bad. It was like a reaction. So I think that's something to think about when we say, like, bad things can make good things happen. Like, of course they can, but sometimes the bad things that happen do end up violating the rights that we live by.
Yeah,
and
that's
that's
right.
something that we have to concede. Like, yeah, I was better for it, but my rights as a human, at least by the code that we live here, were indeed violated.
Right.
Yeah. Which I think is an interesting argument. It's not my argument. It's James Woodward thought of it.
Yeah, right.
Oh my God, we talked about literally everything.
Yeah, we did.
I can't believe it.
Yeah. Okay, you know what? We should actually, we should probably end it here.
I don't even know what time it is.
It's like an hour 52.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So, yeah, thanks a lot for coming to the podcast.
Thank
really
you
learned
for
a lot.
having me.
Right.
This is really interesting.
Right. We really learned a lot just talking to you. Listening to what you have to say. Right. One of the most obvious things is that, well, you really care about people. You really care about the world. You want to make things better. And when things don't go well, that really worries you. And you're still dealing with how to deal with that, basically, what to do then. And it's also clear that you like to think about problems and how to make things better. And that's really commendable. It's actually what we need, right? Is people who have not given up and said, there's nothing that can be done. Well, let's just embrace it now. Right? You're trying to do something. So that's great. And it was really an honor having you, and the listeners are going to have a great time listening to you.
Oh my God, I forgot about that.
Oh, that's great. Well,
oh yeah, thank you.
Forgot about the listeners. Oh my God.
Oh,
Gotta
God.
edit this out.
I just thought we were having a conversation here, Christian.
Well, we were. But
Yeah.
it's a conversation between us, and
That's true.
it's also a conversation with the listeners.
Yeah.
It's like a communal conversation, if you like.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. I've never done something like this before.
Oh, you're really good at it, so.
Thanks.
All right. Well, yeah, let's end this.
Thank you very much for listening to this podcast episode. We hope it was of great value to you. We hope that you learned from it. Shivani had a lot of interesting ideas and insights into these fundamental questions of life. And now the ball is in your court. It's up to you to figure out answers to these questions for yourself. Approval. Why do we need approval? What is approval? Why is it that when people disapprove of us, we feel disappointed and angry? Why is it that when people don't recognize us, that makes us feel so bad? Why is it, how can we be the sorts of people that take pleasure in the work and not necessarily in whether or not people recognize us? How do we do that? Questions about, well, how do we deal with these base human emotions? How do we deal with anger? How do we deal with fear? Can we possibly create a good society, a society that functions well, if we don't tackle these base human emotions? Is it possible for you to transform your society, to change the political system, if you don't change yourself? What is dialogue? What's the nature of dialogue? What does dialogue have to do with active listening? Why is it that when you listen to, you feel really good about that? And why is it that when you listen to others, other people feel really good about that? What is so special about dialogue that it can unify people, that it can bring about love and connection and get people to see things differently? What's so special about listening to someone? It seems so simple. And also the other thing is, how does one listen actively? What does dying empty have to do with active listening? What does you realizing your true potential have to do with recognition and approval? All these are some of the questions that Shivani just brought to the surface for us, and really no one can answer them for you. It's up to you to answer these questions. Thank you once again very much for listening to this podcast episode. If you have any questions, if you have anything that's holding you back, anything that's stopping you from realizing your true potential, please do send us an email. Our email is in the episode description. Otherwise, have a relentless week. Bye.